All right. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate it. It's 10:30, so I think we should just get going. And yeah, this talk is called Why WEMIX Gaming, and otherwise known as Blockchain Gaming is going to Save the World, which is obviously quite a lofty title, but I'll explain why I actually think the two things are connected as we go. Just before I introduce myself, I'd like to just know a little bit about who's in the room here. So just quick show of hands. How many of you are game developers? Okay, how many are Web3 game developers? How many are traditional Web2 game developers? Okay, that's great to know. All right, yeah, so let me get going here. A little bit about me before we do. So my name's James Hursthouse. Currently doing business development for WEMIX, for WEMADE Entertainment. I've been in the industry for about 21 years, I guess, technically in some ways, but a little bit longer than that. So my first GDC was GDC 2003. And actually on the panel, I was talking about this yesterday, on the first panel that I ever attended in the games industry, in my career in the games industry, it was called The 10 Reasons You Should Never Make an MMO, which Gordon Walton did at GDC 2003 when we were all in San Jose. And actually, Wonil Su, who's currently leading the WEMIX group at WEMADE, was on that panel. So this relationship stretches back a long way. But I was very fortunate to have a front row seat for the Jurassic period of MMORPGs. So initially, I got into the industry through Nexon. I lived in Japan for about 17 years. And at the time, Nexon was working with a Japanese company. And that was back in 2001, 2002. And then since then, my career's really kind of flip-flop backwards and forwards, I suppose, between massively multiplayer online game infrastructure, then some content, back to infrastructure. I was a contributing author to this thing called the Metaverse Roadmap back in 2007. So Metaverse and shared digital spaces, Web3, or at least the precursors to Web3, have been part of my reality for a number of years now. Moved to Vancouver, BC, Canada in 2010 to start a mobile game studio called Hursthouse. And for me, the kind of personal highlight of my career so far was the opportunity to work with Iron Maiden on the Legacy of the Beast mobile title and a few other things since then. Yeah, so that's pretty much about my background. So a little bit about WEMADE. In some ways, I like to say it's the largest games company you've never heard of, but with the amount of advertising and sort of sponsorship of this conference, maybe you have heard of WEMADE. But a quick breakdown there. So yeah, basically founded in February 2000. So it's been around for over 20 years now. Went public in 2009, and really one of South Korea's most successful games companies. So about 1,800 employees and a market cap of 1.8 billion and about $300 to $400 million a year in annual revenue. So sizable games company. And the key game titles so far have been the Mir series. And then most recently, we've launched Night Crows, which we'll talk about in a second. So in terms of the company's scope, obviously game business is at its core. And I think this is really important for me, obviously having lived in Asia for that period of time. And back in 2004, 2005, I guess, as free-to-play started to emerge, I could really see that a lot of that innovation in the games industry has constantly come from South Korea and other parts of Asia as well. And, so what's interesting to me about what we're doing with WEMIX is that we're really starting from the perspective of a dyed-in-the-wool game developer, right? So, the addition of blockchain where it makes sense, rather than starting from the blockchain perspective and trying to plug games in, which I think is quite important. So yeah, game business is still very important. Obviously, investment now with the scale of the company, IP licensing. And then since around 2017, 2018, very, very focused on blockchain in general with the WEMIX platform. And we're currently at WEMIX 3.0. So in terms of history there, you can see that starting in 2000, as I said. Mir as a series just incredibly successful. So, at one point, the world record for 800,000 CCU. And then the Windrunner mobile game also released in Korea. World record of 10 million downloads in 10 days. Mir 4 was released globally in around 2020. 1.4 million CCUs, I think still highest CCU for a blockchain game. And then most recently, Night Crows. So as you wander around the conference, you'll see a lot of promotion for Night Crows. Really is a great game. So yeah, basically lots of different game IPs, but the key ones at the moment are Mir and then Night Crows and Legends of Ymir, which is coming soon, which is a kind of Western retelling of the Mir legends. So yeah, a little bit about WEMIX as a platform before we talk about WEMIX Play. Key thing here is that there's basically a very large ecosystem being developed here. So it's not just WEMIX Play, although WEMIX Play is a flagship project within the WEMIX ecosystem. But as you can see here, there's up to around 45 projects at the moment currently contributing to the growth of the WEMIX ecosystem, which in turn contributes to the growth of the WEMIX token, which in turn helps fuel WEMIX Play. So that, again, if you're interested in taking a look at the broader WEMIX ecosystem, please feel free to scan the QR codes here and take a look. All right, so now a little bit about WEMIX Play, just before we go into the main topic. It's interesting because this graphic is something that constantly changing. Let me just start that. So you could see there that, I don't know if you managed to see that at the beginning, but over 500,000 concurrent users for the platform, which I think makes us the largest blockchain games platform in the world, probably by a pretty significant margin at this point. There's roughly about 10 million wallets, which is important as we sort of go through this presentation as to why I think that blockchain gaming is going to save the world in some ways, right? So yeah, if you look at that, you can see there's all different types of games. Obviously, the platform is fueled by the success of Mir and now more recently with Night Crows as well. But I don't think there are many other blockchain game platforms around the world with more than 500,000 concurrent users at any one time. A little bit about Mir 4. Obviously, it is kind of like the engine room of success here. 21 million registered users, 2 million daily active users, 1.4 million peak concurrent. So really, really big game. And what's interesting about it, from my perspective, is that it, again, as I said earlier, it wasn't really started from the perspective of, sort of a blockchain project. It's really taking what was a classic sort of MMORPG and deciding how to properly introduce tokenization and Web3 components into that experience rather than the other way around, which I think is an interesting starting point. So you can see here, as the blockchain started to be introduced, those are the annual sales revenue figures for WEMADE global revenue. And as the blockchain components were introduced, even though, initially and even now, it's a relatively small fraction of the player base that actually engages with the Web3 components within these games, it had a significant impact on revenue. And obviously, it's difficult to tell which is the blockchain game revenue and which is Mir 4 and then Night Crows coming in. But obviously, that's very intertwined at this point. And I think one of the points that we want to make here is that as back in 2004, 2005, 6, people free-to-play gaming, free-to-play gaming, free-to-play gaming, I think now that terminology has really kind of disappeared, right? So we just talk about gaming. Some gaming is free-to-play, but the idea of that distinction has disappeared over time. So what I'll do just now is I'll just give you a quick overview of Night Crows. You can see the trailer here when I click play. And you'll see what a fantastic game it is. And the quality of the game and the way in which the blockchain components, Web3 components have been integrated is really quite subtle in a sense. And we'll talk about that in a second as we go. But just for now, just give you a quick view of Night Crows. So anyway, as you can see, it's really an amazing technical achievement, built in Unreal, cross-platform, mobile, PC, and again, I think the kind of key takeaway from that is that we're talking here about really good quality games that have the blockchain components and the Web3 components introduced actually later on in the game. So you have to play for a number of levels before we even start to introduce some of the Web3 and tokenization pieces. So anyway, that's the background on the company and myself, and so WEMIX Play, why WEMIX Play? I guess from that you could sort of extrapolate why blockchain gaming in general. And so my theory actually is, and the reason why I'm excited to be involved in this initiative is that I actually do think that blockchain gaming is going to save the world. And as I said, it's a bit of a kind of audacious statement, so I'm going to try and defend it for you over the next sort of 10 minutes or whatever that turns out to be. All right. So I've already mentioned, I think, if people who are longer in the tooth and remember the dawn of free-to-play, there was a lot of vitriolic negative reaction from a lot of developers against free-to-play, right? I remember when Kart Rider first started to come out, people were like, oh, that's ridiculous. And then obviously we lived through that phase of comp gacha, anybody from Japan, comp gacha, or nested loot boxes, and all of these kinds of game mechanics that people started to introduce that were probably on the wrong side of the Wild West, right? So I do remember initially there was this really very strong reaction against free-to-play. And it's kind of interesting to look back because I see similarities between that reaction and what we've been experiencing in what I like to describe as the first wave of Web3 gaming, right? So I think there were a lot of mistakes made, but I also think if you look at this graph here, the plateau of latent potential. So I do actually think right now, signs seem to me to be that we're coming out of the valley of disappointment of Web3 gaming, blockchain. Certainly the first wave, like I said, there were certainly some missteps there, but I feel like we're getting towards the end of this. And what normally happens, I think, is as you come out of this valley of disappointment, people think this is just going to carry on in this sort of linear fashion, but typically what does happen is something will click, and then all of a sudden there'll be this acceleration in the acceptance and the adoption of these new game mechanics. So I actually think we're quite close towards the end of that. My sense as you sort of walk around this conference actually is that there is far less of that negative reaction to Web3 blockchain gaming in general. And I think one of the reasons for that is, as I said earlier, what we're sort of doing here, and specifically I think when you look at MMORPG type games, we're just legitimizing player behavior that has existed for 25, 30 years. So if you think back again to the sort of days of EverQuest and sort of titles when they came out, there were a lot of players that wanted to be able to invest in characters. They were spending thousands of hours of time in the game. But then what happened at the end of that experience, they maybe wanted to sell that character, or they maybe wanted to sort of, get a return on investment that they were placing into that game. And so typically what would happen is people would have to go and try and realize that value through a gray market environment, right? So lots of fraud, lots of people getting ripped off. But nonetheless, those player behaviors continue to persist. And so I think what we've been doing here really is starting to say, okay, let's legitimize that player behavior. Let's make a safer environment for players. Let's make it so that, as players decide maybe to leave a game, the developer can actually benefit in some ways from those transactions. And so I think, we'll start to see that as a number of platforms come to the market that make it a lot easier to integrate the benefits of tokenization with true gaming, right? And I think that's really where we're at. Okay, so going back to why do I think that blockchain gaming is going to save the world? The first thing to say is that I actually think it's because I think blockchain in itself, certainly if we can develop blockchain in the way that I think the original architects perceived of it, has this opportunity to be quite life-changing, right? Now, company that I also do some work with, chairman of that board is a guy called Jeff Booth, and his book called The Price of Tomorrow, if you haven't read it, it's really a must-read at the moment. Okay, so what Jeff says in this book is that basically technology should challenge traditional economic models. And in the book, he's basically talking about this shift towards embracing deflationary progress for a more equitable future, right? So it's kind of high and mighty, really, for a Wednesday morning at GDC. But I actually think, as games guys or games people, we're constantly pushing the innovation boundary. And then what happens is people look at that and they go, well, that's very interesting. Gaming's just figured out how to do proper digital identity, or gaming's figured out how to do fraud protection, or gaming's figured out 10,000 people on a server. And a lot of that innovation then starts to proliferate through into other parts of society, like the direct link between video gaming and, for example, digital twinning, spatial business intelligence, all these kinds of things. You can see the origins in gaming. So we should all be really proud, I think, to be part of the games industry, and certainly proud to be part of the envelope pushes when it comes to Web3 and blockchain. So just a little bit about, again, the book and the key pieces here. So first of all, there's a myth of credit that's going on in the current world. So if you think about it, there's no reason that really, apart from this myth of credit, hyperinflation, which benefits a number of people, obviously, think about previous generations that invested in houses. Particular example for me, East Vancouver. You can't buy a house in East Vancouver anymore for probably less than $2 million. And there's no real reason why it's worth that, right? So Jeff's point is that the myth of credit, hyperinflation is benefiting a very small elite. And while the broader population struggles with inequality and stagnating wages and all of our money is becoming worth less. And what that does is it basically leads to societal unrest and the rise of populist leaders, and we don't have to go into too much detail about that, but you can see it around the world. So basically, technology continually makes goods, services, and processes cheaper and more efficient, challenging that inflationary nature of the current economic systems. Right, so there is a fundamental conflict between technology-driven deflation and the central bank's desire to just want to print more money, right? So if you think about the US Treasury, okay, I had a slide, but I took it out. But basically what it says is, let me show you this kind of crazy currency, and everybody thinks it's a token. And 21 trillion in supply, it can just carry on forever. 25% of the circulation's been created in the last 6 months. But that's actually the US dollar. So it's great if you're living in the US, but it's not great if you live in El Salvador with a currency that's tied, or an economy that's tied to the US dollar that's just been devalued, right? And we'll come on to why blockchain comes in there for a sec. So yeah, basically the book says that this whole idea of debt-fueled growth is unsustainable, right? And we are risking severe economic, social, and political ramifications unless we change it, right? So again, in the book, what's going on here is that it's calling for this new economic framework. And we want to harness the power of deflationary technologies, of which I think blockchain is a key one, right? And if we can do that, then an abundance of resources, greater equality, more stable economic future can be the result, right? So yeah, basically what we're saying here is even though blockchain isn't the entire answer, I think blockchain does play this really strong role in driving down costs. It increases efficiency, fostering an economy where abundance is achievable, right? And that aligns with the vision of leveraging technology properly for economic prosperity, cutting out wasteful processes, encouraging deflationary economic models. So, if you think about the key crypto, like Bitcoin in particular, the 21 million finite cap really is a key to some of these issues around the myth of inflation that we've somehow foisted upon the world through normal economic models, right? Shift from debt-based economies, we talked about that a little bit. Really favoring value creation, because I think if you look at smart contracts and the way in which smart contracts can actually allow a market to settle itself on the value that it implies on a certain thing, any given example, that's different from the sort of current situation where we end up with things being worth what people say that they are, right? I think that the democratizing factors associated with blockchain can really come into play here. Right, transparent and efficient value transfer. So this is a global economy now, right? So how do we have that seamless global value exchange with a high level of integrity and reducing the friction and opacity associated with traditional financial systems, which also don't necessarily benefit, the majority of people. Yep, hedge against hyperinflation. We've talked about that a little bit as I was talking about the finite supply of key cryptocurrencies. And finally, ownership and protection of digital assets, right? So we all know that really part of the holy grail here of blockchain is this ownership and protection of digital assets. So indisputable ownership of digital assets, very important, not only in video gaming, but beyond as well. And then my feeling is, again, people sometimes get what I mean by this slide a bit wrong. What I don't mean is that people are going to earn a living playing Axie Infinity. What I do mean, though, is that a lot of the stuff that we're doing in video gaming, having people show up in a digital space and actually engage in economic activity is a precursor to work, right? I think you think 10, 15 years in the future as we're all showing up to work in digital spaces, it's probably video games that's going to set a number of the parameters as to how that works more broadly. Yeah, smart contracts, modern remuneration. So if you think about things like residuals, how do people get paid for working in an environment? I really think that user-generated content and the boom that we're seeing in UGC, partly thanks to AI, but also thanks just to a more general creator economy, again, that's going to find its feet in the video gaming industry. So Here are some examples of each of those points, right? Maybe not the best examples, maybe the first examples, but for example, if you look at Axie, it really helped to empower true digital ownership. If you look at something like Decentraland, the decentralized decision-making, I think is setting a precedent for more inclusive decision-making across other industries as well. It's going to take a few years to maybe emerge, but I think, again, as games designers, game developers, this is the kind of history that we're writing. Fair play to earn models, helping redefine work, income distribution, economic participation. So game participation leading to proper economic participation, or actually not proper, they're the same thing, really. Cross-studio collaboration, so if you look at a lot of, like the Sandbox and games like that, where everybody's working together, potentially there's resource pooling, more equitable ecosystems, promoting wealth literacy. So I think this is really quite important as well. So if you look, for example, at the 10 million wallets that Mir was responsible in many ways for generating, wallet adoption is likely to be driven by gaming across the world. But once wallet adoption's happened, in the same way that people talk about emerging markets going straight to digital banking, for example, it really helps, I think, from an egalitarian democratization perspective. So yeah, anyway, that's why I say, in a sense, because blockchain has the capability to really save the world. Blockchain gaming is the pioneer of blockchain. In that sense, blockchain gaming is going to save the world. So just a quick, once again, a review of this, because now I'm going to move on to the slightly kind of sales pitchy bit of this talk. We would love for developers to come and join us in this mission. And the WEMIX Play platform, as I mentioned before, 500,000 concurrent users. We are looking for games, and we're looking for games from all around the world because we want this to be a global platform. So as I said, if you would like to bring your game to 600,000 concurrent users, 10 million wallets, either myself or anybody else who's here at GDC from WEMADE are the people to talk to. So what do we do for developers? Well, basically, the process is that we give Web3 design support using the expertise from the team. There's a simple SDK, which we can provide to developers to provide all of the Web3 functionality that you need. Advice on things like token issuance, marketing support, again, 10 million players at the moment, through game pages, email, typical things. So really, it's a one-stop solution. So what we're saying here is that even if you don't necessarily have the blockchain Web3 expertise on your own team, let us kind of come and work with you in order to be able to adapt the game to the platform and obviously expose it to a whole bunch more players. The interesting thing, I think, is that, obviously when you look at the Play platform, a lot of the current strength is from Mir and Nightcrows. But I think that's great for everybody because what happens is some of the more casual games, some of the other experiences, because there's an ecosystem and there's an economy here, so some of the hardcore players, obviously, they want more tokens. Those tokens can be generated in other games, put into the pool. And so there's a sort of supply and demand thing that's going on here, which is across the ecosystem rather than only in a single game. So, yeah, so would love to have you guys, if you're interested, please speak to me afterwards or send us an email. We are looking for games to bring to the platform. And hopefully you can join us in our mission to have blockchain gaming save the world. Thank you. So, any questions? And I guess we need to do the raffle as well, right? So, yeah. Are we doing raffle or questions? That's the ones, is it? All right. Are there any? Why don't we do questions first, and then we'll do the raffle right at the end, just before we close? Anybody questions? All right, no questions. Well, in that case, then. Let's do the raffle. So just to let you know, the prizes are the same. So I will just draw two. And we have this really nice Belkin Connect Thunderbolt 4 3-in-1 core hub. And World Traveler multi-plug, very handy for conferences around the world. So I will not look at these. Did everybody get a chance to get a ticket in this box, by the way? Yes? Okay. All right, well, so here we go then. First ticket is 0406. Who's that? 0406. Do you want to come up and just grab this prize? 0406. Congratulations. Yeah, good. All right. All right, one more. I'm genuinely not looking. I suppose I'm really after ticket 666 at the moment with my Iron Maiden stuff, but anyway. Okay, 0411. 0411, congratulations. Yeah, all right. Well, so I mean, I think that's pretty much it. So yeah, as I said, if you've got any questions, please come chat with me. That QR code, I can't actually remember where I made it linked to now, so that would be quite an exciting adventure. I think it's either the WEMIX top page or it could be my email address, I don't know. But anyway, take a picture of that and send us an email if you're interested in bringing the games over to the platform. And thanks very much for coming. I know I was up against Zelda, so I'm very happy that you picked the future, but that's great. Thanks very much. See you.